Alright guys, and now I want to talk about positional sacrifices in chess. So maybe you've heard about sacrifices before, but something you should know is that there are really two types. One type is very direct, one type is aiming for a concrete goal. For example, I want to sacrifice to get the king eventually, right? For a checkmate in 3 moves. I want to sacrifice to get another tactic down the line. I want to sacrifice to decoy a piece where I want it to be, to fulfill some goal that I have in mind that's very concrete and is very direct. It's happening right now. I'm going to get it right now. But the other type of sacrifice is more patient, where we give up a piece or a pawn in order to get a long-term compensation, usually for positional reasons. For example, if I get a passed pawn as a result of a sacrifice, does it win the game for me? No. Does it make their lives harder? Yes. So it's really about what we're aiming for. So let's take a look at a few examples so you get the feel for this positional sacrifice idea. Here, we're going to be Anand versus Adams. And Adams just played b5. And Adams is trying to clear the situation in the center, trying to figure out where this pawn is going. If black is able to, let's say, trade off this pawn and then take on e4 and then take on c4 with the bishop and trade off at least 2 of these 3 pawns, then black's life is easy. That's why Vishy has to figure out a good way to resolve the tension in the center, whether it's c5, whether it's cxb, cxd. Let's see what he does instead. He takes on d5 first, trying to open up the bishop to some extent, and later pushes the pawn. Now, what's going on here right away is that we're getting ready for a positional sacrifice. c5 is already a sacrifice in itself. It doesn't look like a sacrifice, but it allows a little discovery. It allows b4. It says, go on, push that pawn, I know you want to. And if they do, they're going to get into a worse position. For example, after b4, which is what happened in the game, we get not only the passed c pawn, not only do we get the bishop pair, which is actually very strong, supporting the pawns that are yet to come, and the black pieces are completely restrained, right? For example, that bishop has no scope already. That knight can be restricted with f3, and we have a very simple plan. Our plan is push, 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 and we're going to push the pawns with the help of the bishops, who are in this context, in this scenario, stronger than the black rooks on a8 and f8. Whereas the black rooks still need to come in, try to organize some defense. We have a very simple plan. Push, 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 and they're not going to stop us easily. So let's take a look at how things may go. Of course, black gives up a pawn in order to also relieve the pressure, because sometimes we can do a positional sacrifice defensively. Here, he sacrifices the pawn temporarily in order to get it back later on and get rid of this very scary passed pawn on c5, which is going to hurt him in the future. That's why white says, no, thank you, I'm going to keep my pawn. And after I keep the pawn, here come my other pawn. So b4, b5, and in the end, black could not hold off the pawns and gave up. So then here, what we did there was allowed us basically sacrifice an exchange for a pawn in exchange for the bishop pair and the amazing passer on c5 and the strategical advantage. Strategical in the sense that we have a plan and they do not, okay? There are other types of positional sacrifices for different goals. Let's take a look at this goal. Okay, right now we have no clear win for white, unfortunately. And we're going to be Karyakin, we're going to be white here. Black's play is actually very simple. He's going to take on a2 and pick up c2, get some b3 going, and this becomes really scary. In order to avoid this, we have to hurry. How do we hurry? We play e6. Okay. The whole idea is that if they take with the pawn, they're about to get mated. If they don't take, they're about to get promoted on. And if they do take with the knight, I inconvenience their pieces, right? So f6 would be really bad because of e7. And if they played knight takes, which is what happened in the game, then they also get in trouble. Let's take a look. Check and we inconvenience their pieces, right? The one tempo alone, the one tempo gives us enough of an attack to inconvenience black's pieces, who now have to worry about something like bishop g6 with mate. They can't even play g6 because of bishop h6. And they don't have time for rook takes a2, rook h2. Now they have to start worrying about, if I trade off the rooks, bishop d6 is coming. If anything, this bishop can go to any of these dark squares and attack the knight, right? So later it can go to c5. Now you don't have time for a2 because bishop c5. And in the end, he had to try to do something, but gave up anyways. After bishop c5, he could not block white's attack on the knight, all because we gave up this one pawn. So 𝐏𝐸𝐬𝐭 found the key sacrifice in order to get the initiative back, in order to inconvenience black's pieces. So that's always a good reason to do a positional sacrifice. Now, let's take a look at the next example. We're going to be Garry Kasparov, okay? And we should flip the board. Let's take a look from black's point of view. This guy, by the name of Rustam Kasimdanov, is about to cause a lot of problems by taking the knight on c5 and landing the knight on e6. The question for Garry is, how do we stop it? Do we try something slow like queen c6, queen b6, bishop c8? Do we try something like queen d7? All of these lead to worse positions. For example, if I go queen d7, then, oh my goodness, the light squares are just falling apart. For example, check, king runs away, and then they can take anyways, followed up with knight e6. All right, so we're not having a good time here. Garry knew all of this. Garry knew all the problems associated with knight e6, which is why he says that knight is worth an exchange. He's been traveling around so much all over the board that, you know what, he can get a rook if he really likes. But after he gets the rook, he has to give up the bishop pair for it, and he hands over the initiative, right? As a result, we have heavy pressure on f2. We got 3 attackers, if not 4, one day. We have pressure on e4. We have the bishop pair, and the bishop can come from the other side too. We can kick away their pieces when the time comes. And they have no play for their rooks. It's not like they have a lot of open highways, because all of the key squares are covered. So we know that their rooks will be completely obsolete on the d file. And if they're obsolete, my minor pieces will be able to exploit the weak squares like f2. Okay. For example, in the game we had knight d5. We just give away the bishop pair, so we can go for bishop takes f2. And already the tactic works because of rook takes f2, knight g4, for example. And afterwards, queen f2 is coming. It's game over. There is no way you're going to keep the rook safe for long. All right, so then if he doesn't take, then the dark squares are fatally weakened, and we can start pushing up our pawns, which is what he did in the game, and won easily. So here we sacrificed for the initiative. Sometimes you sacrifice not because you have mate or a tactic, but because you're going to start attacking. You have the plan and they don't. They don't have a plan. So it's strategically horrible for white to play this position, since there's no pawns to push. It's not so easy to push these guys, not so easy to push these guys. They have nothing to do, literally. Okay, let's talk about the next example. Here we have a positional sacrifice to open up an exposed king. All right. Sometimes you're not going to have a mate on a king, but you can definitely open him up and make him feel scared. And that's going to be the case in this game. So we're going to be Mikhail Kopylov, and Kopylov is going to punish his opponent's weird opening play. This is not how we play chess, by the way. You're not castled and you're already weakening dark squares. Your bishop is coming out in a strange way. So Mikhail decided to punish white for this play, especially the weakened dark squares and the king who's stuck in the middle. Let's see how. First he castles, and instead of playing bishop e2 and play something reasonable and castle as soon as possible, white says, you know what, let's take out my knight first. Maybe I'll take the center, maybe I'll play e4, but that's just silly. This is silly. And now we're going to exploit it. How? By opening up the center. All we have to do is open the E and D files, and then the position becomes clear about who's winning. Considering our king is already castled, their king is not. So usually if the king is not able to castle and all the pieces are on the board, that is roughly worth a pawn. Even if I'm down a pawn but their king cannot castle ever, like he has trouble getting out of the center and the rooks are not joined, that is worth a pawn in itself, which is why we give up the pawn to get the attack on the king. At this point, it's going to be very hard for white to develop normally, and they will have to do something artificial like king f1 and the rooks are disconnected, and we can keep the attack going. We have ideas like rook d8, pins, all kinds of tricks coming up. And it's no wonder he had a decoy on the queen, elimination of defender tactic, right? Because our pieces are glorious. How can they not win this position? Queen takes c2, queen takes e2, and their king is hoping, dreaming about king h2, but that will never happen because of final tactics like knight e4, doing a double attack on f2, d2, and even the triple attack on the bishop, if you consider that as well. All right. So here, white could not protect everything, and he resigned. So if you have a chance to keep the king stuck in the middle at the cost of a pawn, it's usually a good idea, even though you may not have mate right away. Okay, the last example I have is by Carlsen. And Carlsen was trying to attack as black, except white wanted to take over the initiative as well, which is why in time trouble, white decided to go for e5. And maybe white was hoping for something like pawn takes, takes, and then knight e8, and then he'll live happily ever after, because he's got moves like bishop g2 followed by e6, and the dark squares are weak, and maybe the knight can come in one day, and maybe white is fine here, considering he's got decent pieces, especially if the bishop stays on the board. Now, Carlsen thought otherwise. Carlsen said, why should I retreat if I can get rid of your best friend? You have a forking distance on f2, if I can get a knight there. I have the second rank, potentially, if I can ever get there. And maybe the two rooks can help each other to do that, right? If only this knight is gone, which is possible, right? So then the only thing stopping me from mate is actually your bishop. If your bishop is gone, then the game is over. The only question is, how do I get rid of the bishop? Which is where he comes up with a positional piece sack with knight g4. He knows that knight f2 is a very scary threat that will have to be dealt with. Only way you can deal with it is take the knight. But after you take, I get rid of the king's best friend, who in this case was the bishop, and then the light squares fall apart. Light squares fall apart, the king side falls apart. You can't survive with pawns like these, and a knight on the side of the board doing absolutely nothing. So essentially, black is playing with equal material here. He's not really down a piece. You can't count this guy. He's somewhat important in covering squares, but that's about it. And he's very much restrained. He's got nowhere to go to, so he can't be improved for that matter. And let's go conquer the second ring. Let's go create more threats. And let's go trade off his best defenders. Right? The threat is also rook takes, and we pick up the knight. At which point we're just better and up material. After the queen defends, or tries to defend, it turns out we have the h2 square to attack. And so white resigned, because there was no way to stop both. Rook takes e1, queen takes h2, as well as queen d5. So for example, queen tries to block, but we have the checkmate here anyways. Okay. So what just happened? We got rid of the king's best friend, and then the game won itself with a positional piece sacrifice. We can only do it when our pieces are good and their pieces are bad, as was the case in all of the examples I showed. All right, hope you can use it in your games.